Welcome back for episode 26 of the Astronomical Apocrypha, the Seleukid Empire narrative let's play for Rome 2 with Divide at Impera. Last time, Diogenes pushed himself to his limits, and beyond it seems, marching doggedly for Carthage, only pausing briefly to wipe out the Romans at Thapsos and restock his baggage train. However, no longer able to sustain himself on his typically grueling treks at his advanced age, Diogenes died and was replaced by his protege Bryson, who claimed the elder general's glory for himself at the siege of Carthage. In the eastern Mediterranean, Sophocles found it necessary to bring the independent Cretan city-state of Knossos to its knees by force of arms, capturing their settlement of Heraptina, the strong point of their defenses and the key to the island, the city of Knossos itself notwithstanding. Hierax and his army marched into Magna Graecia, furthering his conquest by capturing Brundisium after the Romans were flushed out of the city by a port blockade by Antigonos Doson. Subsequently, Antigonos Doson and the sons of the Cyclops were the harbingers of Antiochos Hierax's arrival at Cosentia, where the defenders were quickly swept aside, forcing the Romans completely from their home peninsula. Euclid and Antilochus continued their convergence towards Seleukos II, but a violent surprise attack by the Daha nearly obliterated Euclid's army, and would have if not for the sacrifice of his longtime companion, the Watchgoose. Well, Demetrius, what have you to report? We must move quickly to return to Scythia. The steppe is full of predators and they're looking for a wounded animal to feast on.
Many Greek soldiers were killed in the ambush by the horse lords of Kath at Transoxinia, although your advisor Euclid chiefly mourns the loss of his pet goose.
A peculiar love of waterfowl I shall never fully understand, and yet the loss of something kept close to the heart is felt most keenly, even if it has little or no value to another. I expect this eastern campaign will soon draw to a close. When it does, we should hasten to Babylon and from there to Antioch. My brother's western adventures have taken on a life of their own.
Yes, Emperor. Your men have already chosen your honorific for you, I'm afraid. A conqueror like your ancestor of the same name, but ruler of the Diadochi and all the lands beyond. A beautiful victory indeed.
If we're able to break away from the melancholy of the goose's death and take an objective look at the empire, we have established almost complete hegemony, at least from a military standpoint, over the nations of the east and the west, with just a couple of holdout territories in Parthia and the surrounding regions, and the Romans pushed completely from their domains in Italy. I've also taken the liberty of renaming some lands in North Africa, Carthage now overrun with Greek colonists and nominally Seleucia at Carchedon, while the same has occurred at Thapsos, now Apamea by the Salt Lake. As we commence rebuilding the deconstructed slots at Brundisium, Antigonos Doson heads back east to manage the city before going home to Makedon, while Hierax moves to the very tip of Bruttium, preparing to cross the Strait of Messina into Sicily. The one thing we lack for the military victory conditions is a strong navy, 60 ships in total to be exact. So to that end, I'm continuing the naval buildup, with Scylla's Terror adding some more assault ships as the Heralds of Triton continue their westward course to participate in the increasingly naval war with Rome. In Africa, there are a few scattered Roman territories, although the Carthaginians have clawed back one of their territories to the west, and there are a couple of unfriendly Garamantian settlements at the edge of the desert and at the formerly Greek city of Kyrene. Taking a slight risk, Bryson marches back east to deal with the African rebellion. I'm taking some of the free promotion upgrades for Seleukos' loyalists, and Dymas has returned to command the Slayers of Goliath. Most of the tax money this turn is invested back home in Syria with settlement upgrades at all of the minor regions. Parthia has seen the writing on the wall and asked for peace, but I'm determined to teach them a lesson for the refusal to bow down to Seleukid authority. Apparently feeling that turnabout is fair play, the Parthians make me pay for my refusal to treat with their diplomat, striking fast with the small southern force that has caused us so much trouble, this time at Antioch and Margiana. I tried once again to resist this assault with a manual defense, thinking that with only a single unit of the deadly Scythian armored mercenaries I might have a chance, but in reality this battle turned out much the same way as the previous ones. I'll show you the battle, but stick to the high points to keep up the pace. The Parthians struck first with their light cavalry, who circled around to the northern town entrance, where they traded arrows with my own bottom-tier Toxotoy, neither side doing much initially until the dreaded Scythians came down the main eastern avenue, producing a steady stream of missiles that continually eroded the number of defenders, while the horse archers took very few casualties in return. I had simply no way to counter the enemy's missile advantage, as my garrison spearmen were pinned very effectively on the eastern side by the Parthian heavy spear infantry, even though I did manage to engage one of the Parthian missile infantry regiments with a spear militia unit of my own. A flanking attack by the garrison captain and town mob turned out to be completely ineffectual, the Parthian general and his Scythian mercenaries nimbly galloping away, and while this did enable me to trap the missile infantry and heavy spearmen of the Parthians in the eastern avenue, it only meant taking more arrows in the back for our men, as my garrison captain and his hoplite were forced to stand and take the fire as they huddled behind their round shields. The two sides traded losses a little bit longer. My garrison captain and another unit of citizen militia routed, while the Parthians lost a unit of infantry archers, their heavy spear infantry, and their light horse archers. The inability to effectively combat the Parthian heavy bow cavalry eventually proved to be my downfall, as their seemingly bottomless quivers rained innumerable arrows on our hapless defenders. After 11 minutes of this pain and suffering, my defenders see the inevitability before I do, and give up the city to the Parthians. We cost the Parthians nearly half their men in this defense, but unfortunately it wasn't the important half, and only one of their units was completely wiped out. They've chosen to take the city, and now Euclid and Antilochus have two settlements to retake, though they remain preoccupied with the siege of Kath. Having held the city under siege through the winter of 229 and clear into the spring of 228, Euclid and Antilochus have managed to cobble together a battering ram and a couple of ladders, and with this equipment, a decent chance on the auto-resolve, albeit with heavy losses. I'd wanted to wait for a couple of siege towers to make the assault, but the Parthian activity to the south is becoming increasingly concerning, and frustratingly they're undoing much of the progress we already made. I need to sort out the mess in Transcaspia quickly, and I decided to start by cleaning up the northern part of the territory with Seleukos II. The dragons of Bel Marduk are badly underestimated on the balance bar, and though several of our regiments are depleted, I have no doubt that a careful manual assault will win handily against this large garrison. The Parthians are sallying out for this defense, and although this seems like silly AI behavior on the face of it, based on their tendency to bunch up in a single exit, get surrounded, and take withering missile and artillery fire in a typical unwalled defense, I'll call this slightly less silly AI behavior. We're lining up in what I would consider a fairly standard formation, with a wall of pikes flanked by the slightly more flexible hoplite. Although I'm setting Seleukos and the Machaira Four-Eye swordsmen off to the right to oppose the garrison captain, and hopefully turn the western enemy flank through the sheer brutality of their assault. As we've seen, the royal swordsmen can be extremely deadly. Meanwhile, the citizen cavalry take up the far right wing to not only protect Seleukos' flank, but to keep an eye out for an opening to charge the enemy missile corps and/or rear charge, as we've done in the past. The Parthians advance with their light horse archers harassing us on either side of the line, but otherwise coming straight forward in a single long line of spearmen. As their archers hang back in the final moments before the infantry charge, my citizen cavalry move around the edge in preparation for their decisive strike. Up and down the Seleukid infantry line, Seleukos' orders for the infantry countercharge are relayed, as the hoplites rush forward and the white shield phalanges advance in a bristling mass. The ensuing clash goes about as well as I could have hoped, except that the garrison commander hangs back instead of joining his men, pursuing our citizen cavalry as they gallop toward the terrified Parthian archers. It's completely fruitless on his part, of course, aside from the fact that he doesn't wind up carved to pieces by the Seleukid royal swordsmen, who make mincemeat of the Parthian local spearmen on the western side of the line. My swordsmen and archers begin moving around the flank, as the citizen cavalry scatter the Parthian archers. Seleukos is able to eventually catch up with and break the garrison commander's bodyguard, but the tide of battle turns so quickly that the enemy break as the Greek cavalry thunder into their midst, and Seleukos and his men finish off the fight by driving off the Parthian horse archers with a well-timed javelin toss. Although not perfect, I think less than 10% losses, given the clearly erroneous balance bar, was a reasonable result, and should have little impact on our ability to continue campaigning. With this victory, Seleukos secures the city another piece of territory and another ceremonial promotion, earning more respect from his people on his eastern Anabasis. For whatever reason, however, the noble support for the family continues to decline in spite of the nearly triple influence in Seleukos' faction. The other remaining northern territory now awaits Antiochos and Euclid at Kath. After Seleukos' big success, I decided to try this battle as a manual assault as well.
Move quickly. Antiochos is already here and his Lithobolos is firing. I don't want the Daha commander to fall into our comrades' hands. Antiochos has a bold mind for warfare, but a soft heart. It will make enacting the Goose's revenge that much more difficult if I'm forced to wrest him away from the conciliatory peacemongers among our own ranks. You remember when they came at us bursting from the forest, and the Goose saved all your lives. He was my friend through all the adventures of my life up to this point. He guided me through the wasteland, showed the way through fog and darkness, and his wisdom won me many battles. This fight is for the Goose.
This is a little bit different of a circumstance, however, the city being walled and with an unusual configuration, as a river runs right down the center from east to west. With Euclid's army, now renamed the Goose's Elegy, is approaching from the south as reinforcements, I've decided to make a dedicated attack from the north with Antiochos' Jaws of Tiamat. There's no gate here, but based on my prior success with battering down the wall with the Lithobolos at Carthage, I'm going to try the same technique here, while I'm leaving our ladders and battering ram with a few heavy spear regiments to assist Euclid in capturing the southern gatehouse. The first part of the battle consists of continually shelling the northern city wall, as Euclid slowly makes his way onto the battlefield and assembles his forces opposite the southern wall. Antiochos' Lithobolos crew isn't nearly as effective as Bryzon's team, but they do manage after about 7 minutes to topple a single section of wall with enough ammunition left to finish off the adjacent section. And the battering ram contemporaneously arrives at the southern gate and begins hammering away at the heavy wooden doors as the ladders aren't far behind, the heavy Tukul Shipri spearmen having nearly pushed the contraptions to the base of the southern wall on either side of the gatehouse. Even though the defenders aren't high quality, the Daha are defending their city in earnest, so with the southern gate battered down and a moderate-sized breach in the northern wall, it's time to coordinate the assault. On the northern side, Antiochos will be leading the assault through the breach himself, just as Bryzon did previously, but prior to his advance, the 4 units of Iranian medium cavalry move in swiftly to sow confusion in the enemy ahead of our infantry attack. Meanwhile, on the southern end of the city, the Shipri Tukul heavy spearmen brave the oil being dumped from the gatehouse to attack the Parthian local spearmen beneath the entrance, and behind them, a regiment of Euclid's Thorax legionaries follow closely once the oil has ceased to flow. Antiochos quickly drives the enemy back for the breach, enabling more and more of his Babylonian troops to stream through into the city, and the Iranian cavalry mob an outmatched unit of Partho-Hellenic swordsmen just to the western side of the breach. Euclid's Lithobolos has also gotten to work pounding the northern wall, although by this point the infantry attack is already well underway, the only potential benefit being another route being opened for Euclid and his cavalry to move in. Having laid claim to the northern third of the city, Antiochos leads his troops further in toward the capture point, pursuing several Daha horse archer regiments who've fallen back in an organized retreat toward the victory objective, which lies at the center of town just on the northern side of the river cutting through the city. My own Indo-Hellenic peltasts shower the Daha riders with javelins ahead of Antiochos' approach, which turns out to be lethal for the eastern horse archers. One of the Akkadian elite regiments has pursued a unit of armed townsfolk clear across the river via the eastern bridge to the southern bank. And though the fighting has become intense, as units battle in the city streets and alleys, the tide is clearly beginning to turn against the Daha. Back at the southern wall, the Shipri Tukul spearmen and the Greek Thorax legionaries have broken the final group of defenders and are now hauling the Seleukid flag up to signal a clear entry into the city. The Akkadian elite who've crossed the river assault the defenders beneath the eastern gate. Seeing the commotion developing on that side, Euclid spurs his cavalry to move in closer in anticipation of a third additional entry point to the city. Antilochus, having relinquished his Chypriote spearmen and their equipment in the southern gate assault, and having sent his Akkadian elite on a rampage along the river and the eastern wall, orders the Iranian cavalry to press in against the Daha chieftain at the victory objective. Although the cavalry have become bogged down, fighting against some super heavy noble cavalry who have blocked the northwestern approach to the victory objective. However, our Indo-Hellenic peltasts move in undeterred around the smoking wreckage north of the capture point to approach the eastern side of the objective, as do the Free Regiment of Akkadian elite. Beneath the eastern gate, the other regiment of Akkadian elite infantry are joined by the Thorax legionaries, and together the two upper-tier regiments butcher the weak Daha archer and spear levies guarding the gatehouse. Danger now approaching from both sides, the light skirmishing Daha horse archers have ridden back and forth in the shallow water of the eastern riverbed to evade the pursuing regiment of Chypriote spearmen, and now find themselves caught and under fire from the Indo-Hellenic peltasts who hurl their javelins into the light horsemen from the northern bank. A few local militia regiments, oblivious to the plight inside the city, fight on the southeastern corner of the wall against the Kallikian haploi, but as the Seleukid flag is raised at the second eastern gate, the remainder of the city south of the river has fallen entirely under Seleukid control, and Euclid, clasping the reins of his horse tightly, rides with his men toward the eastern gate to exact his revenge. At the victory objective, the Daha noble cavalry fight on against the blunted attack of Antilochus and his Iranian horsemen. All of the Akkadian elite infantry have smashed their way through 2 units of armed townsfolk to come face to face with the real threat remaining, the Daha chieftain and his Grifpanvar cataphracts. Though the adjacent Daha riders throw their lives down for their commander, the Akkadian elite infantry quickly dispatch their riders as the Indo-Hellenic peltasts train their few remaining javelins on the king of the Daha, each one wanting to be the infantryman who brings down the enemy general. By this point, the battle is well within our hands, and though there are enemy troops remaining, and the victory objective has not yet been captured, the enemy king, seeing Euclid enter the city and spurring his companion cavalry across the riverbed with a clear objective of vengeance in mind, quickly orders his remaining Grifpanvar and noble cavalry to surrender to the more tolerant and reasonable Antilochus. It's Antilochus's glory to claim in the battle, as he's functioned as the supreme commander in spite of being the junior officer by far, and he seems to have performed adequately. Although the 800 or so losses are not insignificant, the 15 to 20% of the army it represents is still a vast improvement over the auto-resolve. Though Antilochus has lobbied for tolerance in the outcome, Euclid, incensed at the loss of his loyal pet goose, orders that the city be razed and nothing remain of the Daha culture, Kath becoming another nascent Greek colony in the wake of the genocide. Antiochos Hierax, having readied his men to march with supplies from Cosentia, crosses the Strait of Messina into Syracuse, a woefully undefended Roman occupation of the formerly Greek city. If the Romans had any thought of evacuating by sea, these hopes are dashed by Pausanias, who commands the heralds of Triton to blockade the Syracuse port. With Hierax in reinforcement range, this battle is so incredibly one-sided that I decided even in the absurdly biased auto-resolve was not out of the question, and settled for the 84% survivors just to expedite things. Sylla's terror followed their comrades west, and now we not only have the viceroy himself, but 2 powerful navies in the region. Though I committed Bryson and the Golden Fleece to oppose the rebels in Africa, they're still just slightly short of the city when the nearly full-strength rebel army composed of many displaced Carthaginians makes its attack. I decide not to oppose the Carthaginian separatists, but instead resign the city to its temporary fate. Barely into the following turn, Bryson moves on the city and enacts his reprisal, slaughtering the rebels and swiftly recapturing the city and restoring Seleukid authority. Hellenic building conversions are now well underway in Africa at multiple locations, although I devote a significant part of this turn's income to the remaining conversions, which include swapping the Tier 4 fishing port at Seleukia and Karkadon to a multi-purpose Tier 4 port, which will deprive us of some food, but grant a huge region-wide bonus to maritime commerce, a significant consideration with 3 other ports available in the province. Only one region now stands between Antiochos Hierax and the domination of Magna Graecia, the city of Lilybaeon, and he's not going to change his lightning-fast strategy of attack, instead commanding the heralds of Triton to again blockade the city before the Hawk's Talons move straight in from Syracuse. This time the auto-resolve is even more generous to us, allowing me to take the negligible 10% losses and capture the city without any fuss. Rome has gathered her fleets and mounts a desperate attack on the nearby Scylla's Terror, but apparently they did not expect to contend with our new ballista ships. In spite of the more numerous enemy, the balance bar is with the stronger Greek navy. In general, or perhaps I should say in admiral, I usually accept a balance bar in my favor, and though this might have been the last stand of the Roman navy, I decided to have the weak-kneed Adelphius retreat from this fight, so as not to lose too many ships ahead of the military victory objective which looms ahead. Another weird attrition report, another turn of DEI. In response to these inexplicable reports of death among my garrison soldiers, Antigonos Doson has, like myself, developed the impossibly profane trait, cursing the unseen hand which has taken the lives of his men. Scylla's Terror, having been chased back into the Strait of Messina, continues the naval buildup, adding still more ships to the fleet, while their companion fleet, the Heralds of Triton, are already sufficiently strong to dispatch the Legion II transport carrying the Roman general near Lilybaeon, without the loss of even a single sailor or marine. Though there are rebels of increasing strength adjacent to our prior Scythian conquest of Dakes, what has me more concerned is the proximity of a large Roxolanian army, the faction from whom we took the city not so long ago. I'm moving Seleukos back to defend the city, but there's still a season's march ahead, so there's a chance we could be facing long odds in a city defense. Enemies and potential enemies remain in Africa, primarily at the fringe of the Great Southern Desert, and I begin moving Bryson south with his baggage train out of Leptis Magna in order to consolidate our African territory, not fully expecting what happened next. The small Roman navy that previously drove back Adelphius was in turn driven south by a Carthaginian fleet. This left them adjacent to Apamea, but instead of attacking the city, which was well out of Bryson's range for defense, they sailed southeast, enabled by the additional movement of their retreat to attack Leptis Magna. Of course, the Leptis Magna garrison has not even been rebuilt, and so we stand no real chance of resisting this Roman fleet, even though it's small, so I resign the city to its fate. The Parthians, now pressed into a corner, hunker down in Antioch and Margiana ahead of Euclid's attack. Finally, there's a bit of good luck, as the Roxolanians, having come all the way down from Scythia to reach Dakes, have perceived the Roxolanian separatists with designs on the city as a bigger threat even than the Seleucids who took it. So our former enemies take care of the rebellion for us, not really killing two birds with one stone, but rather more like both birds flying into one another, not requiring the stone at all. Though he just departed from Leptis Magna, Bryson for some reason doesn't have the movement available to reach it this turn, coming up just short of the city assault this season. However, the Golden Fleece are supported by the Heralds of Triton, who are also a bit short of the city, but who approach from the Mediterranean to the north. Euclid has finally reached Antioch and Margiana ahead of Antilochus, although the latter supports his attack. This leaves us with an easy auto-resolve, a victory and just one more territory to deprive the Parthians of their land in the east. Seleukos II returns to winter at Dakes, and seeing the vulnerability of the far-flung northeastern province, orders the defenses upgraded there and at Kath. Our Carthaginian allies seem keen to recapture their former North African holdings in the wake of Rome's decline, and now one of their fleets has come dangerously close to capturing Leptis Magna, although fortunately it seems that we'll have time to move in ahead of their attack. The Garamantians have now declared war on their former Roman allies, and this bodes well for our plan to divide and rule in northern Africa. Meanwhile, Pausanias and his Heralds of Triton have swooped in ahead of the Carthaginian fleet to combine forces with Bryson and eliminate the Romans at Leptis Magna. This is done quickly and with minimal Seleukid losses, earning another naval tradition for the Heralds of Triton and putting the whole of the African province back under Seleukid control. In the east, Euclid puts an end to the Parthian resistance by marching west into their last remaining territory at Nisa. Being that the enemy have only a modest garrison force remaining, the question at hand is not how to achieve victory, but rather what to do with the defeated. Though the obvious and perhaps prudent thing to do with a vanquished foe would be to obliterate them, Nisa represents just a small region in the larger province of Parthiva, and our ally Persia controls the rest. Instead, I decide to subjugate the Parthians, hoping that the two subjugated factions will keep one another in check as we directly administrate the surrounding provinces. I begun recruiting a third and perhaps militarily superfluous navy, the Seleuconauts at Antioch, and I'm getting them started by adding another 4 ships to the flagship of Plutarchos, who's leading the fleet. This navy, in addition to the 2 I already have, plus or minus 1 more, should get us to the ultimate goal of 60 ships. Our following turn, Scylla's Terror, which was so recently a solitary flagship under Adelphius, has grown into a full-stack fleet, representing a more fitting embodiment of its eponym. Now capable of actually inflicting terror, the fleet sails to Lilybaeon, mooring their ships adjacent to the coast and preparing for a full-scale assault on what remains of the Roman people. A very costly upgrade is begun in Cisalpina, although I'm hopeful it will provide a deterrent to the barbarians to the north. The construction of a garrison Clericia at Midlon, this upgrade once complete coming with the associated increases in garrison strength. Leptis Magna seems secure for the moment. Bryson departs again for the desert to the south, while Pausanias sails west to stop over in Seleucia at Carchedon to resupply, and much of our remaining wealth is expended to improve the African infrastructure. What's left is devoted to the ongoing shipbuilding at Antioch under the eye of Plutarchos. During the intern phase, we're informed that the Roxolanians, again seeking to avoid direct conflict with the Seleukid superpower, have become the aggressors in a conflict with a reluctant ally, the Aursi. Although supporting the Aursi conveniently puts the Roxolanians in our sights, as a new target in a war to take all of Scythia, I think the Aursi are a likely target afterward, and I would just as well pit another pair of foes against one another in advance of our attack. Next turn, Hierax's assassins have struck another loyalist. This time it's his former comrade-at-arms Sophocles, although the general is only wounded, and among the Seleukos/Euclid body doubles available to replace him, I choose Hyginus, while Hyginus' identical twin Daphis is nominated to command a 4th fleet, which has been raised at Alexandria. In addition to the ships recruited to the Seleuconauts and the Heralds of Triton, the ships added to the new fleet, the Hydra's Heads, will put us at 58 ships, just 2 shy of the 60 needed for the military victory. Scylla's terror, already at full strength and laden with the men of the Hawk's Talons, departs from Lilybaeon for the Roman-held island of Corylus. With Denia scouting ahead in the desert of Ogila, Bryson follows behind with his army, almost in range of the sparsely defended settlement. With what's left of our wealth for the turn, I purchase some building upgrades and expansions at Egypt and in Africa. The Roman admiral in command of the solitary flagship of Classis 8 pulls back to the port of Corylus, but it's of little use in the defense as the Carthaginian commander and his fleet have joined his ships with those of Hierax's assault force, and the combined strength of the attack is overwhelming, offering us 82% residual troops if we participate. I decided to support our Carthaginian allies in this attack as Carthage wins back the island for themselves, their kingdom now having regrown nearly to its previous size, albeit without the capital city of Carthage itself. The next turn I hire the last 2 ships I needed for the victory objective in the Seleuconauts, knowing that I'll be reducing our fleet numbers almost immediately after reaching the objective, as the enormous military upkeep is cutting deeply into our wealth per turn available for infrastructure improvements. Bryson is now finally in range at Ogila, and attacks with his veteran army, facing the usual enormous but poor quality garrison of Italian troops. The balance bar seems to be giving the Golden Fleece a little bit more credit after their numerous overwhelming victories of this type, but the 32% predicted losses are still too high for me to stomach, particularly with this lone force responsible for our offense and defense in the entire African continent, so I have little choice except to fight this one manually. This minor unwalled settlement assault varies significantly from our prior engagements only in that there is a large hill overlooking the northern side of the desert town. I don't think we've had the opportunity to fight on this map yet, but this hill looks like a prime place from which to launch our projectiles onto the heads of the defenders, so Bryson sets up his army in the manner of Diogenes, a defensive line of phalanges shielding the Ethiopian bowmen and the Lithobolos, while Bryson commands the sword-equipped legionaries on the left wing. The Egyptian horsemen and royal peltas will make a rear attack, circling around to deploy on the southern desert-oriented side of the city. Our deployment zone is just below the crest of the hill, but as the battle commences we can very quickly move our men up to take command of the height overlooking the town, from which the defenders are now quickly issuing. The enemy commander rides up to the base of the hill, but immediately coming under an intense missile barrage, quickly wheels about his horsemen and retreats as the rest of the garrison spearmen and swordsmen make their impossible uphill approach into the teeth of the phalanx. The Egyptian horsemen move in from behind, quickly approaching the capture point as the royal peltas take a circuitous approach around the western periphery of town. Too circuitous, it turns out, considering the very short duration of this battle. Bryson leads the legionaries and royal swordsmen over the hill and down its slope, pausing a half step to fling their javelins into the infantry garrison, and then once again quickly resuming their momentum to crash into the side of the enemy column. Seeing the separation developing between the Roman infantry and their vulnerable missile corps, my Egyptian horsemen ignore the capture point for now, and instead ride directly into the enemy rear, skewering, slashing, and trampling the Roman slingers. Surrounded on 3 sides, their missile support destroyed in the rear, their flank gouged deeply by the elite swordsmen, and still faced with the impenetrable pike wall on the hill, the Romans begin laying down their weapons and calling out for mercy, as the remainder of the garrison surrenders almost in unison. We took 68 losses in this battle, and all but 9 of these were caused by our own friendly fire. Among the Roman garrison, their most lethal regiment managed to kill only 3 of our men. Diogenes would be proud. I decided to raise the city to expedite things and allow Bryson to quickly move on to his next target, either the formerly Garamantian desert city of Garama, now held by the Romans, or the formerly Greek city of Kyrene, now held by the Garamantians. As far as I can tell, this leaves the Romans only with their 2 remaining African territories and the island of Sardinia, toward which Hierax begins moving with his army and fleet. One more in-turn sequence, and the end of the year 226 passes, and though the enemy shuffling during this phase seems to be of no significance, with its resolution and the successful recruitment of our final 2 ships needed for the threshold number of 60, we're greeted with a cinematic sequence for the Hellenic military victory, at acknowledgement of the Seleukid hegemony that has been gained and is now maintained chiefly through the force of arms. The somewhat jumbled-looking list of statistics that follows contains a large amount of data about our empire in the right-hand side. How many turns it took, 189, how many settlements we hold, 90, and so forth. I'm most interested in the economic side, since I'd like to see if we can bring our economy sufficiently up to speed to meet the 90,000 talent income required for the economic victory before we finish our campaign storyline. Right now, our gross income is almost at 57,000, and we're using all but 10,000 of that to finance our enormous military. I believe I could easily cut the amount of upkeep in half as we wrap up our wars, but that would still put our gross income at about half what we need for victory. Before we commence the next episode, I'll take a look through our current building setup and see where we can make improvements, although it's worth noting that this campaign has gone on so long, most of these optimizations may not bear any relevance to the current version of DEI, which is now officially 1.2 while this is 1.1e. In addition to the wealth, we'll need to take the rest of Scythia, which is certainly possible, as well as Provincia, the lands on the coast west of Liguria. We also lack one of the strategic resources, and we'll have to figure out which one that is. And we need 1 more trade agreement and 3 more civil technologies. I think we can accomplish this, but in this cruel ancient world, trade and innovation can probably only carry us so far. Wealth and prosperity will come at a price, and the burden will be carried on the backs of the less fortunate, the peasant and the slave, the farmer and the mine worker. We'll get to all of that in the next episode, but for now we can bask in the glory of a hard-won victory over our successor state rivals, impudent and rebellious eastern satrapies, and the upstart Roman Empire, who now teeter on the brink of oblivion.